Hey everybody, what's going on? Hexlex here with another Master Duel video for you. So we're here in Season 12, and now we're going to be covering our Adventure Phantom Knight deck. I've been playing this quite a bit over the past couple of months, especially since Torn Scales finally went back up to 3. I'm very much a fan of this deck. I like the playstyle, and I like the plays just in general a lot. I think it's a cool, fun deck, and I've mentioned this like extensively over the last couple of months, and it's still very true at this point. This deck is being criminally underrated. I think it's very powerful, and I don't think for whatever reason as many people are picking up on that as I think should. But before we talk too much about the deck here, I want to quick just shout out, if you check out the description below, you'll find a link to my Patreon page. So, you know, I'm always making content every day here on the YouTube channel. The same is actually true over on the Patreon page. If you'd like to subscribe to that for some more daily Master Duel content, including previews and stuff here on the channel, and exclusive content that is not on the channel, only on the Patreon, feel free to check that out. It's just $5 a month, which, you know, is as much you would get for a pack full of filler, but you get a lot more value on the Patreon there. So definitely feel free to check that out. In any case, yeah, Adventure Phantom Knight, like I said, this deck I'd personally put at like lower tier 2, honestly, in terms of power level. I've said this so many times. In terms of how much play it sees, though, it's like upper rogue. And I really do think it is just because this deck, you know, so many cards in this deck have gotten hit that I think some people just kind of discount it as like an out-of-date or like an outclass deck, but it definitely isn't. It's not even just Adventure Phantom Knight, honestly. It is a lot of decks on Master Duel. I think that's kind of like a TCG mentality in general. People will tend to play like the newer stuff, and it doesn't have to be newer stuff as in stuff that's only recently come out, but if a deck has like a new tech innovation or you know, like a small release that gives it like a small new combo line, like that's enough for people, I think, to kind of like flock towards it and kind of leave out, again, this stuff that's kind of seen as generally outdated. Adventure Phantom Knight, aside from, you know, updates that the ban list has forced us to make, hasn't really had any like major makeovers in terms of like how it functions as a deck. That doesn't mean how it functions is still any less valid in this current format, though. I think this deck, like I said, is still extremely powerful. I don't know about extremely, like it's not tier 1. I won't make that claim, but I will make the claim that it's like lower tier 2, maybe upper tier 3 in terms of power level. But again, it's just the representation isn't there. Let's see, I'm looking over the list, and I did rebuild this deck for the new season. I don't know how much changed with it, though. Yeah, I don't really think anything did. I think I've seen a comment before asking like why this is like the one deck we don't play Imperm in. The reason that we don't play Imperm in this deck is because of Phantom Knights of Shade Brigandine. You can't have any trap cards in your graveyard if you want to activate this the turn that you set it. So, you know, obviously if we use an Imperm, then we can't use, you know, Shade Brigandine. The Fogblade and Wings are able to banish themselves from the graveyard, so those aren't an issue. But yeah, it's to activate Shade Brigandine. I actually touched on that a little bit in the 60 card variant as well. I've also seen people ask, I think just one person was asking, like, what's better, the 60 card Phantom Knight Burning Abyss or the 40 card Adventure Phantom Knight? They're two very different decks. Even though they're both Phantom Knight decks, they function very differently in how they combo and what combos they do. The Phantom Knight Burning Abyss deck is more about putting out like a bunch of monster negates and using that Grasslux creator to mill a bunch of cards as resources. Adventure Phantom Knight is more about a streamlined, like dedicated combo line, right? Where we're always trying to end on like a DPE plus Scythe for the lock, and then ideally an adventure setup with the Gryphon Rider, a live Gryphon Rider as well. And we have ways to, you know, assuming we open, you know, the stuff we need to, we have ways to ensure that we can combo into that line every single time. The grass variant, due to the nature of using that Grasslux screener, is going to be a lot more like, let's see what we mill and see what we can do from there. It's a lot more freeform, again, as grass decks just generally tend to be. So again, I would call this a very different deck than from the 60 card variant. Although I will say, if you're only going to build one, I do think this is the quote-unquote better variant. It's the higher power level variant, I should say. I don't really like using that phrase of like this deck is better or that deck is worse. I don't like comparing decks or really players that way either. But decks especially, well, and players especially. Specifically with decks though, right? Like you're always going to have pros and cons for each against the other. Like, no deck is ever strictly better than the other, because all decks can do something different than every other deck can. But as far as, again, just general power level goes, I do think this deck has a higher power level than the 60 card variant. 60 card variant I would call, like, I don't know, upper to mid rogue, I guess, maybe mid rogue. But Adventure Phantom Knight, like I said, would be, for me, like lower tier 2, upper tier 3, somewhere in that area. Alright, so yeah, I think that's about everything I wanted to cover as far as the deck itself goes. Now let's go ahead and break it down card by card, and then we'll take a look at some gameplay. So in this build, we're playing 3 Maxx, 2 the Phantom Knights of Ancient Cloak, 3 the Phantom Knights of Silent Boot, 1 the Phantom Knights of Ragged Glove, 3 Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, 3 the Phantom Knights of Torn Scale, 1 Destiny Hero Denier, 1 Water Enchantress of the Temple, 1 Artifact Scythe, 2 Destiny Hero Malicious, 1 Wandering Gryphon Rider, 1 Nibiru the Primal Being, 1 Harpie's Feather Duster, 1 Foolish Burial, 1 Reinforcement of the Army, 1 Fusion Destiny, 2 Rite of Aramesir, 1 Dracoback the Rideable Dragon, 1 Fateful Adventure, 2 Call by the Grave, 1 Crossout Designator, 2 Forbidden Droplet, 1 Phantom Knight's Wing, 1 the Phantom Knights of Shade Brigandine, and 3 Phantom Knights Fogblade. That's going to round out the main deck. Extra deck has 1 Destiny Hero, Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer, 1 Leviair the Sea Dragon, 1 the Phantom Knights of Breaksword, 1 Raider's Knight, 1 Arc Rebellion Xyz Dragon, 1 Link Spider, 1 Salman Great Almirage, 1 Cherubni, Ebon Angel of the Burning Abyss, 1 Artifact Dagda, 1 Predaplant Vert Anaconda, 1 Dark the Dark Charmer Gloomy, 1 Nightmare Unicorn, 1 the Phantom Knights of Rusty Bardish, 1 Appaloosa Bow of the Goddess, and then finally 1 Access Code Talker. And that's going to round out the deck list there. Now let's look at some gameplay. Alright, this first duel is going to be against Sky Strikers, and this one, from what I remember, would actually end up being like a little bit of a doozy. Like, in terms of having to like find the lethal and make sure that, like, you know, my opponent wasn't going to be able to... Well, you'll see. We'll see coming up here. So, I'm going to start off on turn 1 here with a pretty... This is an okay opening hand. We did open Torn Scale plus something to discard. That's usually a really good sign. We also opened the Water Enchantress too, which is interesting because now we don't have to use our Cherubni to send the Water Enchantress like we do in our normal combo line. If you're interested in seeing how that combo line plays out, the quote-unquote typical combo line, then feel free to check out the description. You'll find a link to this deck's combo guide. But yeah, our Water Enchantress is going to get Ash Blossomed, which really sucks, but it's not the end of the world by any means here. I could just use the Torn Scale to discard the Fog Blade and make some plays here. I'm going to banish the Ancient Cloak I sense to get a Silent Boots. Although now that I think about it, actually, it might have been a good thing that our Water Enchantress got Ash Blossom. Well, I guess no, it's Rite of Aramesir that commits you to no normal summoned effects. I don't think I would have been able to play Rite and actually combo out this turn, like, because I would have had to have, I wouldn't have been able to use the normal summoned Torn Scales as effect, so, yeah, I don't think I actually would have played the Rite, but I did still want to use the Water Enchantress to check for Ash Blossom, which the opponent did have. When I say check for Ash Blossom, I'm not saying like, oh, I expected my opponent to respond to the Water Enchantress with the Ash Blossom, although typically people will still Ash it. I'm more looking to see if they have a prompt to activate an effect in response. If I discard the Water Enchantress or banish it from hand to activate the effect and they get a prompt to respond, then they very likely have Ash Blossom. If not Ash Blossom, the only other things that really could be are Maxx and Dimension Shifter. Dimension Shifter is obviously very rare, and they would typically fire it off at the beginning of the turn anyway. And Maxx, it could be, but like, still, the ability to, like, just by using Water Enchantress effect, tell if my opponent's got Ash Blossom or Maxx in hand, I think is very valuable information. And I don't see a lot of people talking about doing stuff like that, but I do it all the time. Like, I'll activate effects like that just to see if my opponent gets a prompt to respond. And then if they do, that'll help me, like, parse what responses they could possibly have. Another example of this is, for example, if you're doing combo stuff with nothing on board and your opponent has no prompts to respond, but then you summon one effect monster and all of a sudden your opponent is constantly getting prompts to respond, they've got effect failure or imperm, and it's asking if they want to use it on your monster on board. So just, you can look out for stuff like that. So here I'm actually gonna search out the Shade Brigandine like you saw and use that in order to go into the Rusty Bardish here. So that way I still have 2 level 3 monsters on board. Basically, I'm doing this so that I can make the Scythe Lock setup and also have a Rusty Bardish on board. Even though I won't have an adventure setup here, I'm still able to get the full rest of the setup because I'm able to, like I said, use my Shade Brigandine along with the Cherubim to go into the Rusty Bardish. Then I can use my remaining level 3s to make Leviair and bring back the Ancient Cloak. Now, I need the Artifact Dogda to be on board before I can use Ancient Cloak's effect to power up Rusty Bardish and set the Scythe. So I'll use the Ragged Gloves that I sent earlier in order to send something that I can bring back with the Phantom Knight's Wing. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I used the Ragged Gloves to send the Phantom Knight's Wing, and then I'm using that to bring back the Torn Scales, linking that with the Leviair in order to make the Dogda, and then now I can use the Ancient Cloak's effect to boost the Rusty Bardish. That will trigger the Dogda's effect to set the Scythe from my deck. So that's why, I'm basically just explaining that's why I did things in this order specifically. I did have to activate the effects in specifically that order in this scenario in order to make sure that I got the Scythe Lock established. Now I can use Dogda plus the Ancient Cloak in order to go into the Ver Anaconda, setting up the DPE. Oh, you might have noticed that I actually used the Destiny Hero Malicious that was in my hand, even though I had one in deck. That was very deliberate. I very deliberately used the Malicious that was in my hand, keeping one in deck. The reason that I'm doing that is because then on the next turn, if I need to, I can banish Malicious to summon Malicious, then summon Denier, put back the banished Malicious, and then I'll have another Malicious summon later in the turn. Again, it doesn't always seem like the order of things matters, but especially with this particular combo line, the order that I used all these effects did very much matter in establishing the just optimal setup here. Which is, again, as you can see, a Scythe Lock, very, very powerful setup in general to have. Especially against a deck like Sky Striker. Sky Striker, like many decks, funnily enough, isn't able to do anything if they can't go into their extra deck. How about that? It's almost like that's a really powerful play. So they will Raigeki my board and then go for the raid here. I decided to flip up the Fogblade because I was like, it wasn't even so much about not taking the damage. I flipped up this Fogblade and thought, oh, I'll flip up the Fogblade and they can't use Ray's effect during their turn. And then, of course, right after I flipped it, I remember like, wait, Ray's effect tributes its cost, so they can totally still use it. I've actually made this mistake with Fogblade before, too. I don't think with Ray specifically, but with another monster that tributed for cost, so I definitely did not have an excuse there, but yeah, you know. Whatever, we're all human, we make slight mistakes. I mean, you could argue that using the Fogblade there to prevent 1500 damage was the best use of it. Given that I was playing against Sky Strikers, it wasn't really very likely that my opponent was going to be able to, like, do much of anything else anyway with their Ray. Like, yeah, they can go into a Kaina here, but there's not really any other good Sky Striker to go into on my turn. Shizuku doesn't do anything, Hayate doesn't do anything, and Kagiri doesn't do anything here because they don't have any... well, they have the Eagle Booster I just destroyed. Ooh, they could get that back if they really wanted to, but... Now, my opponent is going to flip up an Imperial Iron Wall. This is going to be an issue if I don't address it here, because obviously I, as a Phantom Knight player, need to banish a lot of stuff out of my graveyard in order to make my follow-up plays. Thank God Fogblade is a quick effect. I can use that in response here, but even if I hadn't been able to use the Fogblade in response, I think I would have been fine, actually. I would have still... No, actually... No, I still could have gotten 2 level 3 monsters on board, because the Denier would have still been able to summon itself. But here, the Torn Scales is going to summon itself as well, because I banished the Fogblade. But if I hadn't banished Fogblade in response, I still could have normal summoned the Silent Boots to go into... Break Sword. I'm going to use this Break Sword to get rid of this Imperial Iron Wall here. And I'll go ahead and pop itself. I don't really plan on like using these level 4s as level 4s for anything. Like, this is not a setup for Arc Rebellion Dragon, but you know, we'll still definitely take the extra resources here. I'm mainly going to use them for Link summoning, actually. Now here, there is one other thing I need to do before I can lethal my opponent here, because if I just destroy this Kaina or remove it, they'll get the Sky Striker Ace Ray out of the graveyard, which will prevent me from having lethal. It'll prevent me from OTKing them in most scenarios. So what I'm actually going to do, as you can already tell here, I'm going to use Dark the Dark Charmer Gloomy to pull the Ray out of my opponent's graveyard and summon it to my board. And I'm not going to link with it, I'll keep it on my board. I want it out of their graveyard, so that way they, you know, again, can't use it to save themselves here, basically. So yeah, from here I'll just make a Nightmare Unicorn, even though I don't have anything on board, or in hand rather, to spin something on the board. I can just make the access code talker, pop the Kinda this way, and then swing for lethal. And boom, there it is with the access code. Access code is such a disgustingly good card. It really is gross how good access code talker is. But yeah, so there is the lethal there. We had to do a little bit of work to find it. Not that we were like super threatened by our opponent's board state. It was more of just like we had the upper hand either way, like regardless of whether the duel actually ended that turn or not. But you know, with Phantom Knight's one of those decks where it's like, it's always like, okay, I know I can end the game this turn. If I get an attack, I can probably end the game. So I just got to figure out how to get there. So it took a little bit of combo building, and especially after our adventure line got disrupted, which again, I don't think we actually could have. No, yeah, if we had tried to use Rite of Aramesir, we wouldn't have been able to do that turn 1 combo anyway. So yeah, opening the Water Enchantress was a little bit awkward, but we still very much made it work and established the Scythe lock before OTKing on the next turn. Definitely an ideal Adventure Phantom Knight game. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump straight into the next one. So this one here is going to be against Branded Despia. It's playing a few of the new cards. It wasn't using the Banishment engine, I don't think, or the Expulsion rather. I think it was using Banishment and Albaz the Ashen. So it was a quote-unquote fair deck. It also looks like it's a 55 card deck. I somehow didn't notice that when I was looking at the deck itself there. So here I'm going to open with the Water Enchantress once again, but this time I opened Torrent Scale plus Silent Boots. So this time I do know for sure that I don't need to worry about not using the normal summon effect. I can just activate Rite of Aramesir because I can normal this, special this, go for Cherubini, and then make my plays from there. So I'm going to special the Adventure token and then normal some of the Torrent Scales. That way I can add the Dracoback off the Fateful Adventure and discard that for the Wandering Gryphon Rider. My plan was to use the Water Enchantress here as an additional level 3 extender to make even more plays. But my opponent is going to Ash Blossom the effect of Fateful Adventure here? Question mark? I think I've seen this happen before when Adventure was like a more, quote-unquote popular engine. I was going to say more powerful, but I don't think it's any less powerful in this deck in particular than it was before. But yeah, I saw this before in the past quite a bit. If you're going to Ash Blossom Fateful Adventure, you have to be really mindful of which effect you're Ash Blossoming, because right now my opponent is negating the effect for me to add the Dracoback. What I think what they meant to do was negate the effect that lets me add Wandering Gryphon Rider. And yeah, that's not the effect I'm activating. Thankfully, we do have the highlighted text now to make that a little bit easier to parse, and then, this little blurb up here to state exactly which effect is being activated. But yeah, I don't really care if I don't add the Dracoback. That's not what I was trying to do. I'm more than satisfied to just pitch the Water Enchantress in order to go into my Gryphon Rider here. Then, like I said, from there we can go into Cherubini. I like to send Ragged Gloves as my kind of like backup if I don't need to send Water Enchantress. I like sending Ragged Gloves in general if I'm not sure exactly how the turn is going to play out just yet. That way it lets me keep my options fairly open, because Ragged Gloves can send any Phantom Knight's card to the graveyard, including the Wings and Fogblade, which Cherubini cannot do. So yeah, just having that set up just to more or less have security in my plays moving forward. My opponent did try to drop a Nibiru on me, but I did have the Wandering Gryphon Rider already established. Nibiru is why I like to establish the Gryphon Rider as early as possible. That's why I normal summoned Torrent Scales and tried to add the Equip spell before specialing Silent Boots and doing the rest of my plays there, because I wanted to make sure I had the Gryphon Rider out for exactly Nibiru, which my opponent did end up having. So I do think it was right for my opponent to Nibiru there, by the way. I do think that was the correct play, to get the Wandering Gryphon Rider off of the board for their turn, getting that Omni Negate out of the way. I could actually, if I really wanted to, even use the Adventure token as like a link material now of some sort, but I decided just not even worry about it. So here I'm going to end up going for a somewhat similar line as the last game, where I'm using the Shade Brigandine to... Oh, I thought I was going to make a Rusty Barge there, actually. No, I'm actually using that to set up the Dagda. Yeah, because I didn't have another material. No, I had the Adventure token on the board. So I think I could have made a Rusty Barge here. The thing is, though, like, it would have let me set up a Fogblade, but... I guess it really comes down to, do I value the Fogblade or the Adventure token more? And actually, now that I think about it more in this context outside of the game, I think I should have actually made the Rusty Bardish here and established the Fogblade. Because I could have used the adventure token plus this Leviair to make the Dogda there. Yeah, because now I just have them kind of sitting awkwardly on the board. So, again, not optimal play, but again, you know, optimal play is not going to happen every single time. We got the Scythe lock established. That is the most important part. As long as we have that online, I don't really care well, I mean, I do care about the rest of the board state. But I'm not as concerned about the rest of the board state, because the main thing is they can't summon out the extra deck, and the main thing is, as a result, they lose. So, yeah, again, I really think people are just sleeping on how strong the Scythe lock is, and this deck as a result. I don't think people are sleeping on how strong the Scythe lock is. I think a lot of people know exactly how annoying it is to have an Artifact Scythe dropped on you, but I guess for some reason people have just forgotten how easily this deck can do it, but I haven't. So, let's just go on and move on to the next game. Alright, now we're playing against Numerons. Although my opponent's name is Mr. Blue Eyes. Very deceptive. It's funny, actually, I was reading a thread on the subreddit yesterday, and someone was talking about how, like, they use water sleeves of their branded Despia deck so that Sword Soul players don't call dark on them with Protos. I wonder if my opponent's doing something similar here, where they're just like, oh no, don't mind me, I'm just a Blue Eyes player, said the Numeron player. In any case, I actually have encountered a Numeron player in the past who, like, had a Cyber Dragon mate. I think their name was even something like Best Cyber Player or something like that. And then it just turned out to be Numerons, which I thought was very funny, because, like, oh yeah, Cyber Dragons normally let everyone go first too, so it's like, very, very sneaky, sis, I see what you're doing. Anyway, yeah, so the opponent is going to throw out a Maxx here, which is very much going to put a damper in my plays. I'm not going to continue on after that. I don't like playing into Maxx on turn 1, especially with a deck like this. Because, like, yeah, it's like, you might argue, like, well, with this deck you can just Scythe lock them. It doesn't matter how many cards they have. If they can't use their extra deck, they still lose. And that is very true, but Nibiru the Primal Being is a very scary card, and Maxx, especially the amount of draws that this deck will give my opponent off of Maxx, is decently likely to draw into Nibiru against me. So, yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and stop. Plus, I still got the disruption in the form of a Fogblade and a Maxx of my own, so I have options here. Opponent is going to begin with a Lightning Storm, though, to destroy that Fogblade. And then, yeah, reveal themselves as the dirty Numeron player they are. Actually, the Numeron calling from hand, even. Yeah, I'm going to fire off the Maxx just to get one draw. The opponent's going to call by. I don't care. That's fine. Not an issue. I am actually totally fine with that. I would much rather than call by this Maxx than something on the next turn that I need, like this Torn Scales here. And there is going to be a next turn, even though my opponent doesn't have the full Numeron setup, because they actually don't have enough damage here. They'll deal 500 with the first strike, but after that, the rest of their Numerons go up to 2,000, and I'm left with 1,500 life points. So that's the other main reason I was really not scared at all here, is I'm like, oh, my opponent doesn't have lethal. Even if they had, like, I'm trying to think, if they had Limiter removal, no, I definitely would have been dead no matter what, but even if they had like some amount of extra damage, I could have, if I really wanted to, use Fogblade's quick effect and defend it with the Torn Scales. They're going to end up going to the Infinitrack Fortress Megaclops. Totally fine with me. This is like the one deck where this card is actually terrible. It's like we have so many outs to it. Not even just in the form of Xyz monsters, but even this Dracoback, as you can see here, is obviously like very much going to be an out to this Megaclops. I'll start by making the Adventure token, getting the Fateful Adventure set up, but I'm mostly doing this to bait out this last card in my opponent's hand, see if they've got, like, you know, any kind of a response. They don't, so I know my players are going to be good to go from here. Now, like I mentioned last time, this is one of those decks where, like, if I've got any amount of comboing I can do, I know I can find lethal, so I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to look for lethal here. And there are multiple ways that I could have gotten it here. Like, I've already got 4,000 damage on board with the Adventure setup alone, but I wanted to go for something a little bit flashy. So here's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to use the Break Sword effect, not on the Megaclops, but on the Numeron field spell, the Numeron network, to bring these two back as level 4s. I'm going for an Arc Rebellion finish, is what I'm doing here. I really like Arc Rebellion Xyz, just in all of the variants of Dark Rebellion. Like, I really liked Yuto in the Arc V show. I thought he was a cool character. And I think Dark Rebellion Xyz Dragon is like the coolest dragon from the Arc V series. It's probably just my favorite out of all of them. So I like Arc Rebellion as well, just all the variants, and like I said, any excuse to finish the game with Arc Rebellion, I'll take it. Now I can use the Dracoback to bounce the Mega Clops and then swing for lethal with 11,000 if my opponent would have allowed it, but now they can sure dish out OZKs, but I guess can't take them. Womp womp. Alright, we've got one more game to watch. Let's go straight into it. So this is one of the few times where I can't really tell you what deck I'm playing against. I don't think it's a bad deck. It's like a level 4 machine control deck. Like, it's got some gadgets, and how do you like this opening hand, by the way? I just casually opening all 3 of my fog blades. Like, what is this? I guess at the very least I did like hard open the Fusion Destiny, so I can make a DPE if nothing else, and it will be if nothing else, because without that it would have been nothing. Yeah, nothing else. So I'll set 2 of the fog blades and a call by. There is actually a reason to keep one in hand, is if I top deck a Torn Scales on my next turn, I'd very much like a card to discard with it, and fog blade, as we all know, is a very good card to discard with it. So very much want to keep one of my 3 fog blades in hand. I'll set the other 2 along with my call by for the opponent's turn as well. So even though this hand was really, really weird and honestly not good, it was still like, you know, we still have a DPE plus a bunch of disruption, so it's not horrible. So they'll start with Pot of Extravagance. At this point I'm like, okay, it's probably like Eldritch or something. Then they drop the gold gadget, right? I'm like, okay, so it's like a new take on an old gadget stun deck is what my initial thought is. Oppression gadget. Oh my god, this is going like way back to like 2007, I think. But yeah, the idea is that this is when Royal Oppression was not only still around, but at 3. The idea is that you would, like, your monster base would be the gadgets, red, yellow, green gadget. You'd use the Oppression to cut your opponent off, summoning like two bigger monsters. And then from there, you would just destroy your opponent's stuff with like Smashing Ground, Shrink, like Dimensional Prison, just like all these 1-for-1 cards, while your gadgets just kind of built up on the board and slowly took the opponent out. So I thought, okay, we're playing it's a modern take on Oppression gadget. Then my opponent normal summons Gradius and activates Infernal Reckless Summon, which I think this might be the first time ever, like ever, I've actually had this card successfully resolved against me. This is one of those cards that I've always kind of looked at and been like, oh, it's a very intriguing card. I wonder what combos you can do with it. But I don't think I've ever actually had somebody activate it. And for a Gradius of all things, I'm like, is this an actual, at first I was like, no, is this an actual Gradius deck in Diamond? Because this was from like the very end of the last season. I was still in Diamond at this rate. I was like, oh, Gradius deck in Diamond? But it's not a full-fledged Gradius deck with like Gradius's option and all that stuff. They're actually going to go for a Bagooska here, and I'm like, oh no, this is getting a lot more gross than I thought it was going to. And then they just set 1 card and pass, and I'm just like, okay? What a whirlwind of a turn here. It's actually not over yet. During my opponent's end phase, I'm going to do a couple of things in this specific order. I'm going to flip up the Fog Blade, again, during the opponent's end phase, and use it to negate the Bagooska. That will free up my effects here, and now I can use DPE's effect, again, still during the end phase, to pop my opponent's face down card, which turns out to be a safe zone. So I'm like, okay. I see what was going to happen here. My opponent's plan was to put the safe zone on the Bagooska and then just, like, I guess, sit on it for the whole game. Maybe attacking me with the Gradius? Like, no, because it's still... I don't know if they can turn their monster to attack. I don't know. I don't know what my opponent's plan was beyond Bagooska plus Safe Zone, and I still don't really know what's going on with their deck, but after this combo got disrupted, they decided they were done, so I guess that's all they had. It's like, what a wild ride of a game. It was a short but a wild one, but that's all the games I've got now, so let's go ahead and move on now to the outro. Alright everybody, thank you very much for watching all the way to the very end like this. I greatly appreciate that. Not just personally, but of course as a means of supporting the channel. Other ways to support the channel include, of course, commenting and subscribing. Comments, as always as ever. Would love some of that constructed criticism. I don't know, I can think of the phrase for a second there. Constructive criticism. If you have any regarding the deck build or gameplay there, definitely feel free to let me know in the comments. I do like getting that feedback from you all. Subscribing, obviously a great way to support the channel, and we'll let you get notifications of when these videos drop. That does happen every single day, so you do get daily Master Duel content just for subbing here on YouTube. And if you feel like throwing $5 a month towards the Patreon there, you'll get even more daily Master Duel content, as, you know, like I said, games and other exclusive content do come out every day there as well. But that's all the time that I've got for you for today. So without further ado, this is HexLex. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.